that standards review committee is made up of 5 people who are being assigned by the Senate leader. You have 5 people who are assigned by the House leader. Those people happen to be parents of students who are in K-12 education. And some of those people represent PTA, some of those people happen to be science teachers or in the field of science. And then you have another 7 individuals on the review team who happen to come from the State Board of Education. So the State Board leader happens to be the one who designates and assigns those 7 people. So there are 17 people on the Standards Review Committee, and they provide overarching suggestions for how to move forward in creating and writing the science standards. After that group meets and provides suggestions to the State Board of Education, the State Board of Education approves for the writing team to move forward and to be in writing, based on those recommendations. The writing team spent several months during 2018 doing that work. Ricky had over 80 people at different grade levels and science experts and science teachers working on those standards. And then they have come back to the board, providing updates to the board, and now we are at the place of the 90-day public review.
Which started in January.
Which started in January of 2019. And I do want to say that we are towards the end of that. I want to say that it ends April 10th.
April, yeah.
So as you're sitting here and you're in this evening, as we say, please go make sure you submit information. Please note that the 90-day public review does end on April 10th, and at that point in time, the State Board of Education and the Writing Committee then work to talk about what recommendations to move forward to finalize the standards, and then Ricky will then take those in front of the State Board of Education again for final approval. And then, by the way, once that has become a final approval, you begin the pilot or the beginning of the implementation, but the full implementation of the standards does not occur until a year after the standards have been approved, and that's when other things kind of fall in line with that. Just wanted to go through that discussion, and especially to talk about the fact that this was a process that started apparently in November of 2017, and we are now towards the end of the 90-day public review. With that said, you want to go on with the purpose?
So for those who are joining us, again, welcome. Thanks for coming. The purpose of this meeting, more than anything, is to get your feedback on this document. This document and the revisions that come afterwards, based on the direction of the State Board of Education, will become the standards set in place for students teaching or learning science in grades K-5 and in high school core science courses in 9th through 12th grade. What we're really looking at here from you is specific feedback looking at standards individually. And so what we'd ask of you is that if there is a specific standard that you have a concern for or a question about, that you, just because we all have the document, tell us the page number, tell us what standard you're looking at so we can all turn to it and get there. If there's general feedback you have, just an overall, that's perfectly welcomed as well. So again, just let us know if it's general feedback and we can write that down as well. I mean, looking at this, I'm trying to follow our notes. I mean, so as far as this goes, we're looking for any kind of comments and suggestions. These could be things you do like or things you don't like. These could be things you want changed or things you want there. So they could go both ways. We don't just want to hear, like, what isn't good. We'd love to also hear what we want to keep in there. So that's important to think about as well. One thing we'll ask is that just for the sake of time, as far as this goes, it says that there's 3 minutes per initial comment. We have plenty of time and few people, so I don't think we're going to stick by that 3-minute rule, even to start. So, but we do ask you still to kind of watch your time. We want to make sure that you are, if one person takes 15 minutes, that means only 7 more people can speak. Actually, with the information. So again, that won't work. So please. So yeah, so with this introduction, it really is 6 people. I have the math person here, so we're good. The biggest thing is, again, is that as soon as we are done and there's no more feedback, we will conclude the meeting. We don't have to stay until 8 o'clock. So I mean, again, and you also feel welcome to leave at any time. If you want to get your things out and then you're like, I have somewhere to be, don't be scared at all to feel like if you need to leave. That's fine. We do ask, however, that again during the meeting that we do make sure that only one person is speaking at a time. And I said this before, and I'll say it again, that because this is being online, or this being shared online, the only way that the people online can hear you speak is if you use the microphone. And so what we'll do tonight is that if you have something to speak, we'll just have you do good old grade school, raise your hand. Jolie will come and hand you a microphone, and we'll give you some time to speak. One thing to be careful of are two speakers in the ceiling right back there. We found that if you stand below them, there's the possibility we might hear that wonderful screeching feedback noise that we all love. So if you would like to speak and you hear this, just walk to the side, just stay away from the microphones. And I think we should be good here, actually, so those ones should be fine. But just as a warning. And with that, is there anything else? Any questions about this format before we get started? Not that you can ask them because you need a microphone? Just kidding. Okay, then we'll get started. So again, here and I will just be writing meticulously everything you say, and we're just excited to hear what you have to say.
Who's starting this off?
Whoever raises their hand will be starting.
I'll start off.
All
right. Well, thanks so much for the opportunity. I didn't know I'd be starting off here, and so I should have had things at hand. I apologize. But thanks for the opportunity to have a hearing and provide input from public and so forth. But what I wanted to focus on right now is some more in-depth information on what the fossil record says. And actually, I'm going to have to be fooling with these, so if you could hold it. Oh, thank you so much. All right. Anyway, I have some graphs here. Now, these graphs are derived from peer-reviewed papers that have been submitted on where the first life of a certain thing appears. Okay? And we're going to be looking at the basic phyla. Okay? So in other words, this is not an actual graph. This is just to try to help people understand. If there was only one phyla of all life, but there may be variations within that phyla, if there was only one phyla, or the basic body plans of life, we would have a single line going up through the ages of history. So we have time on one side, and we have different phyla on the bottom. Now, so that's to try to get you to understand. Now, if we look at the Darwinian perspective, you remember Darwin drew a little tree, right? Now, this also is not an actual graph on the data. This is just to help you understand. So on the bottom, we have that little spark of life, and then we have it branching off and additional phyla generating and so forth. And so this is what Darwin drew in his little notebook, is something roughly like this. Now, never mind that I have ordered these in a way that would make a nice tree. Even if this was not ordered in a nice tree, you could see still 1 at the bottom, and then 2, and then 6, or whatever it is, and on up. Okay, got the idea? All right, now, we are going to look at the actual data of phyla of when they have appeared, based on the peer-reviewed information. And this is the actual data. You see here that every single, we have a really difficult time making any kind of a tree out of this data. This is the Cambrian explosion right here, or the Cambrian era right there. And you see, everything begins pretty much at one time. And this is based on the standard dating theories, you know. Now, there are 4 phyla that appear later. Now, that's not to say that there might actually be down there, but we haven't found them. This is the data, you know, not the extrapolations or imaginations. This is the data. Okay, now actually, it's a lot worse than that. Because when they started finding these things, when they started finding like the Burgess Shale and the Chenjiang fossil beds, there were tremendous numbers of creatures that they had never seen before. Totally blew them away. And they actually said, some of the researchers, they said there's got to be over 100 different phyla represented. And so if we graph that out, this is what they imagined seeing or saw. And, this is not all classified hard data, but this is kind of a representation of what they saw. And along the bottom, you can see all these little blips of things that were new. Okay? Well, why don't we have that in our books? Well, actually, arachnids, the little spidery things, that we love so much, they used to be a phyla all by themselves. We don't have arachnids recognized as a phyla anymore. Why? Well, the reason why is because there's too many things out there. And they, rather than draw all these phyla with all these different columns and just one little twig standing up, they combined a bunch of them. So arachnids are no longer a phyla recognized. But it got munched in. So today we have 35 phyla recognized. And 26 of those appear in the fossil record. And 26 of them show up in the Cambrian. 4 came later, and 4 disappeared. So there was kind of some interchange. But that's what the data shows. And with that, I'll let someone else speak.
Is there a specific standard you'd like to refer to with that information?
That refers largely to Biology 4.1 and all the section in there. But this is also going to be repeated, even though it's not specifically stated. The fossil record is repeated in many of the grades. You can go through, I just did a little search through them. And though they don't focus just on Darwin's tree and things like that, it's obviously going to be part of the whole mix as they discuss the fossils in all these various grades. So what I'm saying is, we need to teach the data objectively. Some people think that, in spite of all this, it's a tree. Okay, let's get the data out. Let's share the scientific data that also is contradictory to Darwin, and let's look at both sides.
Okay, thank you, Vince.
Thank you.
You did about perfect. That was like 5 minutes. So with that, we should be, if everyone keeps that going.
Thank you. My name is Lonnie Wynn.
Thank you.
I'm an engineer and a business owner in Ogden, and I have 5 kids. My oldest is 13, and my youngest is 3 weeks old. We just had a baby 3 weeks ago. We've homeschooled for 2 years previous to this year. This most recent year, we had our kids go back to public school, and it's been a good experience for them. There have been a few concerns I've had, though. My oldest daughter in 7th grade has come home being taught some things that were controversial, and some of them were completely incorrect. One example is one day she came home and told me that her teacher told her that human and chimp DNA were 99% similar. I wasn't exactly sure what to tell her. The current standards, so I want to review a couple of the standards, but I really like some of them. So 2 of the controversial topics that often come up, one is environmental standards, and the other one is, of course, Darwinian evolution. I don't think anybody is here talking about Newtonian physics. We're talking about the more controversial things. In standard ESS 4.3, this is on page, I don't have a page number here. I believe that's on
Page number. As soon as someone ESS is the Earth Science Standards.
I believe it's page 40. Page 40, it says, evaluate competing design solutions for developing, managing, and utilizing energy and mineral resources based on cost-benefit ratios. What a good open-minded way to do science, to evaluate competing design. Whoever wrote that, I'd like to congratulate them. That is well written, and that allows for a diversity of opinion. We live in a country where not everyone agrees, if you haven't noticed. There are very many different opinions on every topic, and this environmental science is definitely one of them, and what a good way to write it, because some kids are going to come in and say, no, solar's the only way to go, and this is why. Some kids are going to say, my dad's a coal miner, and I went to the coal plant, and I saw these things, and this is why coal is even better. And what a neat thing. They get to share those ideas. Nobody has to feel intimidated. The teacher can have different ideas. Everyone gets to be their own person. What a good thing. Sadly, the topics on Darwinian evolution do not have the same level of open-mindedness, and what Vince was sharing contradicts some of the popular theory, but it would be completely unacceptable in a classroom today. And based on the standards written, I believe this is page 59, if I'm not incorrect. It's the standards that he was referring to on Bio 4.1. Oh, that's not correct. Yeah, Bio 4.1 through 4.5. 45. Some of the standards read like this: obtain, evaluate, and communicate information to identify patterns that show common ancestry and biological evolution, and are supported by multiple lines of evolution. In other words, they're saying you must find things that show our theory. 4.2 says that the process of evolution by natural selection is primarily caused by specific factors. In other words, support what we believe. 4.3 is even worse. Analyze and interpret data to identify patterns that support the claim. 4.5, use evidence to construct an argument that supports the claim. That does not allow for a diversity of opinion. These things do not allow for different ideas. So back to my daughter's concern of the 99% DNA similarity. This
I think we just lost your mic. If it's dead, Joe, you might just want to grab one of these and carry it around.
I might do that. It's coming on. It's playing around.
Thank you.
Yep. It is flashing, so.
Okay.
Sorry, Lonnie.
Okay, no problem. So this information that my daughter received, that human and chimp DNA are 99% similar, meets these standards. It does support these claims, and therefore it agrees with this. There's only one problem. It's completely incorrect. It's false. In Science magazine, this is June of 2007, volume 316, page 1836, they review how this comparison was done. They show that 25% of human DNA did not have anything to compare with chimp DNA. They only compared 75% of human DNA with 68% of chimp DNA, and found out that portion was 99% similar. But they leave that out. So in other words, 75% of the time it works every time. And that doesn't work. We can't share that kind of information. But if I brought that up in a classroom, if a student brought that up, if a teacher brought that up, that would be dangerous. They would have to worry about being threatened or concerned about their jobs even. And that's just unhealthy. I think that since we do live in a country of various ideas and opinions, and this is science, we should be able to share different ideas. What a neat thing that would be to have children be able to come in, young people and teachers even, and share possibly some of the things that Vince just suggested, or this information. Our textbooks are full of information that meets these standards, that does support these claims, but is also completely incorrect. And I have a dozen other examples. I'm not going to go through them right now. But I just think that these sections should be rewritten in a similar fashion to the other portion in environmentalism, to allow for competing ideas, encourage competing ideas, and let students feel comfortable in sharing those. Not only things that support the claim, as stated in almost every one of these, or show common ancestry, but maybe things that contradict common ancestry, because they're going to run into that later, and if they haven't had a chance to learn how to deal with that, maybe they want to believe these things, and that's fine. We all have different ideas, and that's great. That's what makes us America, and we should be proud of that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lonnie. Next.
My name is Pam Allen, and I've been to several of these meetings already, and I have a lot of ideas been swimming around in my mind, and I didn't know how many people would be here tonight, so I did sit down and write things that I thought. And some of these are very general, very background, but we'll get eventually to specific standards. So with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, our founding fathers embarked on a journey to establish a new country, It was accepted in that day that our leaders would be moral, God-fearing, upstanding citizens. In Article 1, Section 7 of the Constitution, the President is instructed to return a bill within 10 days, Sundays excepted. Church services were routinely held in the government buildings, and presidents and legislators attended the meetings. Multiplicity of founders expressed the idea that our Constitution could only work for a religious and moral people. The third article of the Northwest Ordinance in 1787 states that religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and happiness of mankind, schools and means of education shall forever be encouraged. On January 1st of 1802, in a letter to the Danbury Baptists, Thomas Jefferson assured them of a wall of separation between church and state that would never allow a state-sponsored religion, this being affirmed in the First Amendment. Sadly, that wall of separation has become, instead of freedom of religion, freedom from religion, with the only state-accepted religion, atheism. Because of this, our public tax-supported schools teach the atheistic theory of evolution in our schools. This theory is presented as the only way to explain life on Earth, even though there is much evidence to disprove it. Proponents expect that any year a missing link will be found. Others, too impatient to wait, have foisted hoaxes on the public, such as the Piltdown Man, and produced artist renderings of speculative progressions such as ape to man, four-legged mammal to whale, Haeckel's admitted fraudulent embryo progression, still printed in textbooks. How does this advance scientific truth if paleogeologists are searching for props to a crumbling theory and ignoring evidence that does not support said theory? The truth is our objective. Share all discoveries. Allow evidence for as well as against in classroom as well as laboratory. To accept that all life came about by an inexplicable chance occurrence that produced a one-celled organism with, unknown to science at that time, incomprehensible amounts of DNA, or that all matter in the known universe came from a big bang, an explosion of a speck smaller than a period with no explanation of a cause, to me, takes more faith than any religion. Since atheists have succeeded in having God banned from public schools, it is not necessary to mention even intelligent design, but important to allow evidence that doesn't happen to support the currently accepted theory. After all, science, as a way of knowing, must search for truth to build on truth, for without truth, of what value is your work? Anything proven to be false must be discarded. Science is built on observation and must often change theories as they are proven wrong, even long-standing ones. Science began with the idea of discovering God's works. It is returning to that ideal. To defraud our children of the right to both sides of the argument is criminal. To be fair, some Utah teachers explain this theory with the caveat that it is just theory and may not agree with what they learn at home or church, and to talk with their parents. But will they always be allowed to do so? We think this would not change in Utah, but it has in other states, and the strong possibility is there. Encourage questioning of this theory wherever it is by adding or against in proof of evolution. I support what Lonnie has said, and do refer again to Biology 4.1 through the ones through 0.5. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next.
Thank you. In case you're not stenographers, I'll give you some of my notes.
Thanks.
Would you like to be here at the table?
No, I can just do it.
Okay.
Okay, my name is Frank Strickland, and I'm a geologist. Have worked in national labs and published in peer-reviewed magazines and publications. There are several reasons I am concerned about the next generation science standards as currently proposed. First of all, as a scientist, I object on scientific ground. 95% of the material, as mentioned earlier, is good, presents good science, and is supported by data. However, there's about 5% that I feel is being used to indoctrinate students in a non-scientific way. Specifically, they're given conclusions and told to go out and find evidence for it. And there are some excellent examples given earlier. Also, in two subjects, evolution and in environmental science, there is the use of heavily emotional words, charged words, and stereotypical thinking that is used in order to characterize anybody who is not following these conclusions as being anti-science or worse. This is so that if they come across anyone who disputes the conclusions they are given, they are taught to react strongly and emotionally to it. And in fact, if you try to talk to students in these areas, by and large, they go from 0 to 100 emotionally, and it becomes very difficult to discuss the topic because they're, especially one of these topics is couched in the terms of apocalyptic. If you don't accept this in 25 years, life as we know it will cease. This prevents any discussion of the material either in the classroom or later on outside of the classroom with parents or anyone else. This technique is not appropriate for Utah classrooms. And some of the science itself is very poor, if not downright fraudulent. Of course, the Haeckel's now infamous Biogenetic Law, where he had woodcuts in the 1800s showing the development of embryos, showing humans going through pigs and salamanders and dogs and chickens and so on, and finally arriving at human form. It was disproved when he first put it out. His own university came up against it. And in the 1990s, French scientists, in order to put an end to it, actually took pictures of the embryos at the same points at which Haeckel's woodcuts purported to show them, and there was absolutely no correlation. And yet, this 1800s science is being promoted in this science standard as current. I mean, it's incredible because the students can go out and type in Haeckel's embryo development diagrams into Google, and the entire first page is showing that it's a fraud. And so this is one of several different topics and subjects, and obviously we don't have time to go into them. But it's one of the problems with having a national curriculum is they get frozen in time. And much of this curriculum was written in 1911 through 2011 through 2014, and it's set in stone now, and there's no way to go in and actually have input and change it at the local level since it comes from the national standards. And so that removes being able to adapt the curriculum to current science and research. It makes it very difficult in order to change it. And that is one of the major problems with having a national standard. Another area of major concern that's extremely offensive that the authors, as exposed in an outside article where they, in PLS One magazine, gave some insight into some of the objectives. And also in the flyleaf of one of the biology textbooks that are being used in Utah right now, state that the material is specifically designed to create a crisis of belief for anyone who believes in the Bible. And in fact, in the biology textbook, it said the material presented in here will create a conflict with anybody who believes in the Bible, and also an existential crisis concerning meaning to life. This is not by accident, and is one of the areas that any parent who's concerned about it should be one of the strongest reasons for opposing this material. Again, these science standards are designed to indoctrinate kids and do it in an emotional way that cuts off any discussion. It's fraudulent science and should not be in Utah schools. These standards will be replacing science standards that have been around for decades, and these science standards are great. They promote looking at controversial topics from both sides and allowing the students to arrive at a conclusion. The new standards, again, give a conclusion, have the students go out and find evidence to support it. And anything that is against the conclusion is not allowed. Another major problem is that the governor said that we would never allow outside groups to dictate to Utah their teaching materials for the local schools. And yet that is exactly what this standard does. In essence, it's admitting that Utah scientists and educators are too backward and provincial to come up with our own standards. And I don't think that's true. We've got some excellent scientists here that can develop our own curriculum. We don't need to go outside. And the material that is being proposed is literally, word for word, the national standard, except that Utah has been put before it. In fact, in the earlier submission, even the copyright law, statement at the bottom saying that this is copyrighted by the national was
This
included.
is the only document that's been released. There hasn't been an earlier document of that.
The one in the middle schools,
Oh, that, okay.
that was previously in the middle
That's
school.
not this.
I understand that,
Okay. Just want to make sure it's clear.
but it shows the degree to which we look to the national in order to write our curriculum. There's been amazing developments in the field of genetic entropy, microbiology, climatology, that is actively censored out of Utah classrooms. We've had some presented here by some of the other people. For instance, soft tissue in dinosaurs is discovered in the Hills Creek Formation in a Tyrannosaurus rex. And we're talking about blood vessels with blood corpuscles still in them, in material that's supposed to be 100 million years old. And since the researcher found it in that material, it's been discovered in soft tissue on virtually every continent in the world. And yet this is not allowed to be talked about in the schools. And so I would propose a couple of things. One, allowing teachers the freedom to be able to introduce current research in order to allow the students to catch up on current developments. And it's changing so rapidly that to freeze it time frame wise, a couple of years ago even, is to give students that are outmoded data and outmoded research. There's one book, Evolution's Achilles Heels, written by 7 PhD scientists who are reviewing the current research in their current area of expertise. And it was 2 years ago, and even it's beginning to be outmoded, but it shows the degree which in evolution the basic theorems proposed by Darwin is being shredded by current research. And it's only getting worse. And yet this needs to be able to be discussed, because it's going to leave our students unprepared for the real world when they go out and if they go into science, the current science, and they'll have no clue of what's actually going on right now. So please reject this next-gen science standards, and let's go and put some real science and real discussion back into the classrooms. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
I'm speaking for Sharon Anderson. My name's Darlene Morgan, and my cousin Pam got me to come because she couldn't come. So I am taking her place, and I will read her comments. Sustainability and the proposed Utah State Science Standards. The proposed science standards contain many terms related to sustainability. What some people mean by sustainability may surprise you. Let me explain. In 1992, a United Nations Earth Summit was held at which leaders of more than 170 nations, including the USA, signed on to promote a new environmental order for sustainability development and global control. The next year, this book was published to explain the agenda. It speaks of an eco-revolution that is, quote, essential in order to shift the world onto a new pathway to a more secure, sustainable, and equitable future, close quote. Equitable, by the way, refers to redistribution of wealth. But let's continue. The introduction says this is a blueprint for actions to be taken globally in every human activity. Clearly, this agenda is about something huge. The Global Biodiversity Assessment was published in 1996. It calls for urgent actions to reverse the effects of unsustainability human activities, including grazing of livestock, agriculture, paved roads, aquaculture, fossil fuels, dams, reservoirs, Judeo-Christian Islamic religion, golf courses, and private property. This list may sound preposterous, but are you aware that roads are being destroyed in England and that in California dams are being dismantled and reservoirs drained because they are considered unsustainable? Raising cattle is often condemned. Using fossil fuels is designated and, is denigrated, and renewable resources such as solar and wind and promoted and subsidized. Many sustainable words, terms, and concepts included in the science standards indicate that the science curriculum may be used to promote the United Nations view of sustainability. These include climate change, weather patterns, global warming, sea levels, greenhouse gases, surface temperatures, renewable energy, emissions, carbon dioxide, urbanization, building dams, social culture, and environmental impacts, and fossil fuel combustion. We must be good stewards over the earth. But many educators are unaware of goals that are driving the sustainability movement with the intent curtail almost every human activity in the name of sustainability. They may not recognize that concepts compatible with the United Nations views are embedded in the proposed science curriculum. Utah should not be using science to promote this brand of sustainability. Students should not be socially engineered and indoctrinated with values that are promoted by the same organization that believe people are the problem, that using fossil fuels, owning private property, raising cattle, and building dams are unsustainable activities. In light of these concerns, these standards need to be reevaluated and revised.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Here you go.
What I had was, I came down here and I brought a 5-minute clip, and I thought I wasn't know what to expect, but if anybody's interested, it has to do with, the whole Darwinian build-up. And so I'm just saying, if anybody wants to see it, or you're moving on to another subject, whatever, but I don't even know if we could it's just a little, yeah, I don't know if
Do you
it's,
want to just share with everyone where they would find it if they were interested in watching the clip?
yeah, they have to see the clip though, but, so I don't know if, I just was waiting, so it's up to you people. No, this is a,
Is it on your laptop?
yeah,
Do you want to set up your laptop and maybe we can catch it?
it might not even work.
If it's something, when everyone's through talking and we're finished, if it's before 8 o'clock, but otherwise, if you wanted to, is it something that is on the internet that you would be able to, because I don't know that we would be able to, we would be hooking up your computer, but if you were to let us know when we're done, we could do that, or let everyone know where they could go to find it is also great.
Yeah, that's the funny part. I'm the only one that has it. How do you like that?
Oh,
No,
it's a
yeah.
special, okay.
Yeah, it's a doctor, and they just go through the problems with Darwin and, the issues. So it's just real quick. It was like 5 minutes. So if anybody's interested, I'll leave it up to you to figure out how to bring it to them. And if it's offensive, which I don't think it is, we could just drop it,
Yeah, we are more than happy to have you share and then share what's on the clip and discuss it. And then at the end, like I said, if there's time and that maybe we could use a flash drive or something like that.
Oh, okay.
Good evening. My name is Alex Popora, and I'm the director of the Utah Society for Environmental Education. So we're a nonprofit here in Utah that supports and promotes environmental education across the state. We focus on teaching people how to think, not what to think about the environment. So I am here, even though I provided some comment online on specific standards, but to speak in support of the standards, especially the practice of science, so science literacy for all students, and the 3 dimensions of science. Those approaches really support how students learn and understand the world around them, and environmental education also really supports how students learn by getting them outside. They can actually practice and observe those phenomena and really get into the 3 dimensions of science. We talked a little bit about how the standards are the how, but not, or the what, but not the how. We provide a lot of content in the how. So environmental education will really help support students with these standards by placing importance on the interconnected nature of science as it's practiced and experienced in the real world. It emphasizes the importance of students using scientific practices to help them apply what they're learning. It promotes the development of scientifically literate citizens through interdisciplinary hands-on learning. So we are really supportive of the new science standards and are glad to help provide support. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Thank you.
Now that I cleared my head a little bit, I was really nervous up there, but
I'm nervous just carrying the microphone around, so.
Yeah, the reason I said this was kind of strange, it's what it brings down is all the dig sites and all the stuff that was supposed to back up Darwin. So you have all your like you say, dig site and the museums and everyone, and that's what you're probably thinking, he probably has somebody in here that's a little off balance, and I'm not, I hope. And but it shows you the schools, the dig sites, and it was enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'm Mark Barlow, a retired electrical engineer. I had chemistry at Highland High School in the 11th grade, and then AP chemistry, double period, senior year. And then I went to the University of Utah, and since I'd had so much chemistry, I took sophomore chemistry and worked in the chemistry stockroom. So as an electrical engineer, I've had much more exposure to chemistry than most electrical engineers. I have had the courses you're talking about here for chemistry and the follow-on courses. I'm also reviewing the physics, since I had physics senior year in high school, again at Highland High School. I went to the University of Utah, took sophomore physics there. That's with calculus, the version that medical doctors, engineers, and scientists are required to take. And I did get straight A's in that. So I have had the background for reviewing these items. From what I see in the standards,
I'm not real happy. It seems like it's been greatly watered down since what I had. My comments written, the physics are failing to teach that in equations, the units add, subtract, multiply, and divide, etc., to yield a solution with the proper units. By units, I'm referring to meters, kilograms, seconds, coulombs, things like that, the basic units that things are measured in. If you do the equation right and have a good equation, put the units in with the proper units, the units that cancel and come out at the end are the correct units for the answer. That concept was taught me in high school physics. I don't see it being taught here at all, and that's one of the most important things I learned there, because if that doesn't work, you can question the equation. I have looked up many equations on the internet and found them to be wrong because the people putting the equations on the internet didn't understand this principle that units have to work. And so I'd have to get every equation from 4 sources and review all of them to figure out, well, what's the truth here? You can't trust any one source because they don't do this right. Then the students are asked to design things without being taught all the necessary relationship equations first. I went on, I became an electrical engineer, even got a Master of Engineering in electrical engineering, all from the University of Utah, Bachelor of Science and then Master's. And I have designed things, and I know what it takes. Expecting high school students with just a rudimentary knowledge of a few of these relationships to design, build projects, I think is expecting an awful lot out of them and forcing them to go dig in and teach themselves physics, which I think is kind of a cop-out for the teacher. I think physics in high school should be a broad brush introduction. If you don't get that introduction and you hit the college course without that, you're in for a lot of hurt, because you need that to understand what's going on in college. If college physics is the first time you meet physics, heaven help you. So you need to get more in high school. There's a lot of emphasis on half of Newton's second law, F equals ma, force equals mass times acceleration, without ever teaching the other half, because that is just half of it. Force equals mass times acceleration plus the velocity, that's the exhaust velocity, times the rate of mass loss, dm dt, if you know calculus. And that is truly Newton's second law. And if you don't learn all of that, you can't properly explain how a spaceship can accelerate, because there's very little drag out in space. That's the net force from external things. Your acceleration is created by the exhaust velocity times the rate of chucking mass out the back. And so for long space travel, they're talking now of things that exhaust at near the speed of light. They shoot electrons or something out really fast and lose little mass, and that way they get a low thrust for a long time and really accelerate. But students can't explain that based on what's taught here. And then nothing is taught about friction that I could see. Thus the students exit the class without understanding the principles of safe driving on ice and snow. If you can't understand that, heaven help you again, because here in Utah we drive on ice and snow. The students will be ill-prepared for college physics, since so much of physics is not taught at all. Examples of this are Doppler shift, rotary motion, Ohm's law, electrical circuits, and vector combination of forces, just to name a few. If those things are not taught in high school, like I say, when you meet them in college, good luck. And on chemistry. Chemistry fails to teach the different kinds of chemical reactions, including electrochemical reactions and acid-base reactions, just to name a few, while taking time out to inject earth science, economics, and physics. This will leave the graduates ill-prepared for college chemistry. Chemistry should spend all of its precious time teaching only chemistry. There is no shortage of chemistry to teach. I mean, it goes on, and college or high school should again be a broad brush treatment that introduces the student to all these different facets of chemistry so that they'll be prepared once they hit it at the university level. From what I see right now, they'll be ill-prepared. And those are my comments, and I've had these courses. I've been through it, and that's my assessment.
Thank you, Mark. Next. Thank you.
I just very quickly want to add two additional ones that need to take a more open-minded approach. This is on page 59, standard ESS 1.2 talks about the Big Bang and suggests that we should find evidence to support it. ESS 1.4 says construct an explanation of the nebular theory of the solar system formation and the evidence supporting it, and that should allow for a more diverse opinion. Thank you.
I'd like to do a follow-up on that point there. When there are errors found in the current curriculum statements, such as the chimpanzee agreement with humans or the Big Bang, for instance, most major cosmologists about a year and a half ago signed a statement that the Big Bang no longer works. It's no longer a functional theory. When the current research comes up and the statements made in the next generation science statement turn out to be incorrect scientifically, there needs to be a method to be able to change that and change it fairly quickly and update it to the current science. And right now there's no mechanism to do that. And one of the students that brings up a challenge, because he looks like he's trying to impose an agenda and so on, when he may be actually just presenting data.
Thank you. I want to focus on something right now. Boy, this seems to be clipping. All right. Well, anyway. Yeah. Okay. I want to focus on an aspect of science in which I hear arguments all the time saying that, well, if we don't teach Darwinian evolution, we're going to suffer in our medicine because that's a foundational point in medicine. That actually is a challenge statement, and from a number of things. But let me share with you this particular little talk I did one time. I think it'll illustrate it. But Robbie, a young man full of hopes and dreams, suddenly found that his life would be very different than that of his other young friends. A life-altering disease led to the untimely death of my nephew. Yes, it is my nephew. At the young age of 15, he was the victim of a rare recessive genetic disorder called Fanconi anemia. Recent research regarding this disease has revealed that non-coding portions of DNA may hold some answers for people afflicted with this disease and subsequent susceptibility to certain forms of cancer. By the way, non-coding DNA is said to be, well, I'll cover it down here. Let me not jump ahead of myself. Okay. In the past, little attention was paid to this junk DNA, claimed inert leftovers of an alleged evolutionary past. Failure to consider the functional significance of these non-coding regions of DNA because of an evolutionary mindset has delayed research in certain vital areas of medicine. this baggage of evolutionary thinking has been dramatically demonstrated over and over again. At one time, evolutionists listed 180 vestigial structures in the human body. Previously, these were routinely removed and discarded. Today, it is recognized that every one of these structures serves a purpose. And by the way, I have resources on these if you ever want to find out about them. Having reviewed the draft of the proposed science standards, I can tell you that this draft, which is heavily based on the next generation science standards, is missing core pieces, the heart and soul, really, of science, particularly when it comes to politically driven agendas, areas of Darwinian evolution and global warming. These topics are taught as unquestionable facts in the proposed standards and not as scientific theories, which have been and are challenged by scientific data. How much needless suffering and even death has been caused because of the educational mindset and insistence on an evolutionary paradigm. And let me insert here that these non-coding regions of DNA have been found to be the keys to cancer, which these young Fanconi anemia sufferers are greatly disposed to. You can read more about these things on the website sciencefreedom.org. Now, we know better. Research in these genetic areas, which has been previously believed to be useless leftovers of an imagined evolutionary past, may spell some relief for those from some of the challenging complications of this disease. And let me tell you, it can't come soon enough. Unfortunately, Robbie's family's fate was worse than the cold statistics of the recessive genetics would have one believe. Of the 5 children, 3 of them have Fanconi anemia. So, along with Robbie, little Katie, and also Marilyn, are staring in the face of this same heinous disease, the disease that took their life of their older brother, Robbie. Thank you.
Okay, we've touched on this quite a bit. I prepared a lot to refute the global warming that is the catastrophic man-made climate change, which shows up in, let's see, ESS 3.4 and ESS 0.3. Yeah, well, I may not have copied everything down for that, but anyway, we know climate has not been constant on our planet throughout its history. Fossils of tropical plants have been found in the Arctic, and we have accepted evidence of a massive ice age. Medieval warm period of 950 through 1250 brought grape harvest to England and grain being grown in Greenland. It was a boon to mankind. The little ice age started about 50 years after that and ended about 1850, and the warmth since then has brought noticeable improvement. CO2 is blamed as a culprit for catastrophic changes in climate, but CO2 feeds vegetation and improves crop yields when it is plentiful. We know that tree ring width increase is a better marker of more CO2 in the atmosphere than it is of warmth. There have been times when there was more or less atmospheric CO2 with higher or lower temperatures, even before the industrial age, which supposedly started all the problems. All of this is discoverable and has been published time and time again. What does affect climate? Well, we can start with the sun and check volcanic activity that cools things, and of course there are others, but time is short. Proponents of this catastrophic view, in order to push this position, hide facts and skew statistics to try to make their ideas accepted by the populace. In 1989, after a brief scare that we may all freeze to death, They had convinced 32% of Americans of this possibility, and with a few ups and downs now in the 21st century, that percent remains about the same. This is scaremongering at its highest level, being taught to our students by teachers who have also been taught and fooled by the same faulty science, but intentionally incorrect as well, if you could call this science. Sadly, even NASA and NOAA have been caught hiding and erasing historical temperature records, as well as purposefully rigging reports to make highs higher than they actually are, such as having thermometers placed in parking lots. These are some of the instances where so-called scientists have hidden or misconstrued evidence, skewed or erased statistics. Those who know are not fooled. You've certainly heard that 97% of scientists agree with the proposition that man is causing this catastrophic change in our climate. Well, that is to say, if you send out a questionnaire to 10,000 climate scientists worldwide, receive somewhere in the area of 3,000 answers, that's 3,000 out of 10,000 sent, and of those 3,000, 92.6% come from America and 6% from Canada, heavily weighing North America. And then decide that less than 80 of the responses are expert enough to be acceptable, and then decide that 97% of those agree with the proposition. I guess that is how their statistics would hold water, but its sample is extremely small and engineered by cherry picking. Then, when you take 1,200 climate science papers published between 1991 and 2011, disregard those who are either silent or dissenting as to the effect of man on the climate, then take only 33% that merely mention that man may have some effect on the CO2 levels, and include those along with the few that actually regard man-made warming as bad, of course you can get a high percent of consensus. Although these abuses of statistics have been proven and oft reported, yet they are still cited endlessly by those who are determined that everyone accept their view as solid science, exactly the opposite of what is true. Is this the way we look to science to improve our human condition? To a community that viciously attacks those who don't toe the line on the politically correct position? The view that destroys careers of those who dare present opposing fact or unveil deceptive practices? Is this a reiteration of the Inquisition? I've heard teachers say that their students are terrified by the theories they teach, expecting rising oceans, widespread drought, mayhem brought about by a planet that cannot sustain the population. Was it 10 days ago that students walked out of class or stayed home to protest what they don't realize is a hoax? The alarmists of the last century were proven wrong and will continue so against the climate and population alarmists of this century. But this does not stop those who want to control the population and enact laws and regulations that will cripple the economy with no significant effect on what they are claiming to help. Our children deserve to know the truth. Politically correct falsehoods hurt all of us, our children, and generations to come. Utah should not follow this line of thinking, but lead the way by exposing error and supporting proven fact. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Okay, do one more. Darwin, as a good scientist, gave 3 ways to disprove his theory. He said if any one of these 3 areas or assumptions that he had in his research could be disproved, that his theory would absolutely fall apart. Unfortunately for him, in the last 10 to 20 years, all 3 of those areas have turned out to be false. One is that it requires successive minute changes leading to major changes. It turns out that there's no mechanism that has been demonstrated to add to the genome permanent changes that can be passed on that are positive. He posited that it would be mutations. Mutations have turned out to be 99.99% deleterious. In fact, in all of the mutations that have been studied, less than a dozen have been positive, and they've been marginal. So it led one scientist in Russia to publish a paper that said, given these facts, that we should have died as a species 100 times over in the time that we've been living due to accumulated mutations. The other two, again, I don't want to go into detail, but they have all three come up in spades against his theory. My background in the Army was in meteorology. That's was my field. So I also have an interest in the climate change side. And as I look at the data as a scientist and look at, behind the scenes, the statements and how they arrive at their conclusions, I'm very disturbed by some of the trends. For instance, in the statement that every year is more warm and setting records than the previous year, if you look back in there, for instance, they normalize the data. Every meteorological station is distributed evenly around the nation. Some are in the cities, some are in the urban areas, and some are out in the countryside. Well, obviously the urban areas are warmer due to the bubble effect around the cities, where you have pollution, you have concrete that absorbs radiation, and so they're significantly higher than the countryside, where you have a lot of vegetation. Well, the people who are proposing global warming went out and normalized the data. They never gave a justification for it, but they said, oh, well, we need to normalize the data, so we will raise the countryside readings to match the city. And voila, they came up with record high temperatures. And it's that kind of data manipulation that makes me very suspect. And they discount this effect of the sun. Every day we see the effect of the sun. You get up at 4 o'clock and then go outside and then go back outside at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The difference is purely due to the sun. And to say that it has no effect and variations in the incoming solar radiation, which we call insolation, introduced by sunspot activity, is to deny history. The Maunder minimum, where there was decreased solar activity for 70 years, led to such a climate cooling that the Thames River froze over and they were able to ice skate on it. And so solar activity obviously does impact, and for them to deny that is, again, very suspect that they're trying to manipulate the data. And so as a scientist, I look at the hard data on the surface and in the satellites where they're measuring actual temperatures, versus most of the climate models are just that, they're computer models. And as you tweak the input to the models, you can change the output. And the two are really in conflict. The actual data does not support the computer models. So we need to teach that to the students. They need to be able to look at both sides of an argument. And if the other side is so overwhelming in their data, great. But let's talk about it. Let's at least give the students the option to listen to both sides and look at this science, the hard science, and come to their own conclusions. Thank you.
Is there anyone who has not, I guess, well, not everybody has shared, but is there anyone who hasn't had a chance to share that would like to share, or any other feedback specific to the standards? Pam?
This is just kind of a general statement on the whole procedure that we have of reviewing these standards. I've talked with a lot of parents, and they feel unprepared, overwhelmed, and without the foundation to speak to the standards. Looking on the Survey Monkey, they go, I just don't know what to do with this. It's just beyond me. And they don't feel like they have the time to do it. If they can't do it in 10 or 15 minutes, it's like, sorry, I just don't have the time. And I know there are a lot of people out there who would feel this way if they were, felt more solid in their foundation or knew how to approach them. So even though we've got, 3 months to do this, there's a lot of people out there who don't put any input in because they don't feel like they are necessarily strong in that area or able to take the time to do it. And so I don't think that I really have a remedy for that, but I just want to mention that that is a problem that many people have. They feel overwhelmed by the possibilities, and they are concerned that they don't have enough background to speak out and be knowledgeable on what they have to say. Even though they have feelings, they don't know how to express them. Thank you.
One thing you could tell your friends that are feeling that way is that I know that there are copies of the draft standards on the website, so they can take their time and, read a page a day or whatever that happens to look like for them. They can comment on the elementary standards as well as the secondary. It doesn't need to be an overarching, but also just letting them know that there is also a space for general feedback, that it doesn't have to be specific about the standards, and that one of the things about it is it is a survey that is online, and they do not need to worry about judgment, that they feel free to go on, and while there are not 90 days left, there's still a good 15 days left. So let them know that, that however much time that they have is valuable, and we appreciate it. So, thanks. Any other comments? Vince.
So I held those graphs up a little earlier, and I wanted to refine a couple things in them. There are, as I mentioned, there are some places in those graphs where the phyla pick up later in the strata, and I want to point out something. At one time, there was a the alleged ancestor of all land vertebrate life is the coelacanth. It disappeared from the fossil record the same time the dinosaurs did, which by standard dating techniques is 65 million years ago. And this was the darling of all land vertebrate life as far as the alleged ancestor. And some time ago there was a museum display that was being put up in the Chicago Museum to display this ancestor of all land vertebrate life, the coelacanth in fossil and so forth. And the very day, this is rather ironic, the very day that display opened, a fisherman caught one. Now it wasn't live, but it was fleshy. And now, I didn't bring any pictures, but I have pictures of people swimming with these things. And they were thought to be the ancestors of all land vertebrate life because they had these, really fleshy flippers on the bottom side of them, and they were imagined that they crawled up on land with these fleshy flippers. And it turns out that they're not that kind of fish at all. They're deep sea fish. And but they haven't been in the fossil record for these alleged 65 million years. So what I have here, I have that same graph. This is of the actual data of when things appeared. You notice there's a couple of yellow lines which don't show up on the screen very well. But we have a little yellow line here, a significant one here, and one here. And those 3 yellow lines are there to show, now these aren't phyla per se, but one is the coelacanth. That's the little line over here. So it's been missing for all this time. And what I'm saying is that the fossil record is incomplete, but those things that we do know through the actual data don't build a tree. Now, is it possible that this phyla could actually go all the way down to the beginning? It's possible. Or that this may extend up, you know. Future science studies will help us understand those things. Now, this is an interesting one right here. This is the Grapdelites. Now, Grapdelites, and Frank will know all about this since he is in the geology field. Grapdelites are an index fossil for understanding where some of the earliest forms of life begin. These Grapdelites go way, way back into the Cambrian area. And they disappeared, believed to be 300 million years ago. Well, a few years ago, they caught some alive. Now, since they caught them alive, they could have shown up in the fossil record anywhere in that alleged 300 million years missing. But they didn't. But still, what it's showing is that there is a stasis in life because the Grapdelites look exactly the same. 300 million years. And in all that time, allegedly, you know, things crawled up onto the land and developed into people and so forth, and yet they're still the same. And yet not prevalent enough to show up in the fossil record everywhere. Obviously, it wouldn't have been something where that they have their nice little warm spot. It's been, life is changing. And another one is the Willemmy pine. The Willemmy pine disappeared also about the dinosaur time. And one day, a person was in Australia off the beaten path, and lo and behold, he comes across a live dinosaur. Well, it wasn't a live dinosaur. It was something from the dinosaur era that he recognized as the Willemmy pine, and it's there just as it was in the fossil record. Anyway, another aspect that is believed to be powerful evidence for Darwinian evolution, in fact, Kevin Padian, who is I think he's curator at a museum, he's a PhD, he's well recognized in the field, and he said that the whale fossil evolution is the best evidence that we have in the fossil for evolution. And he says you've got to be blind or 3 days dead not to see this. Well, you can go to the charts of these things, and it does produce a very nice little diagram out looking like an evolution of whales. But someone went to a museum, and they noticed that in the Rhodocetus, one of these in between these missing links, if you will, Rhodocetus was missing all the characteristics which they claimed were very whale-like, like flippers, the ball tail, the fluke, and so forth. Those things were all missing. So he interviewed, and this is on video, you can look at this interview. He interviewed Dr. Phil Gingrich, who is the person who found these fossils and said that these are intermediates. Well, he interviewed him, and in the course of the interview, it came out that no, they had not found these whale-like features, but the rest of it looked kind of whale-like to him, and so he imagined it and drew them in, and that's what we see in our museums today. It's what we see in our textbooks today, but it didn't really exist. And I have a part of a quote from him. Let's see. Yeah, here it is. He says, "Since then we have found the forelimbs and the hands of the front arms of Rhodocetus, and we understand that it doesn't have the kind of arms that can spread out like flippers on a whale. And yet, it's still the prima donna in evolution." Well, I'll let someone else speak now for a moment. Yeah. Okay.
Get you back here. He's one of the guys that's on there, on the video that I have, and they're sitting across from each other. And he says, "Oh, by the way," he says, "this whale thing is missing what is it? Oh, well, it was void, so I just drew it up. And I'm sitting there, and this video, CDC, shows you when these people get interviewed, boy, they really start to run. The one that got me most is that he goes real deep, I go shallow. Is when they say you see a mouse and you see a bat, and normal thinking would be where the average person would reason, okay, this little mouse is going to keep on running around until his legs turn into wings, and he'll be a bat. And they're not even in the same family, no phyla there either. So I thought that was a good point. We ran them down.
Thank you. Does anyone have any other comments specific to feedback for the standards? Or comments that you haven't had a chance to share?
We were talking about bats. I can mention something about bats that is very fascinating.
I'm happy to have you do that. Is there a connection to the standards or something that you want to share that you're...
Biology 4.1 and so forth, yeah.
So do you want to, on page...
Yeah, Biology 4.1. It talks in there about the look at DNA evidence to show that there is a common ancestry in all life. And though you can find things like cytochrome C that's in all living things, and one could infer that that is because of an evolutionary past. But you could also infer it's because there was a common designer in the two. But getting back to this thought on bats, now bats have the ability to have echolocation. And echolocation takes some very specific mechanisms in the creature. And the bats just suddenly appear, like everything else pretty much, just suddenly appear in the fossil record, all fully formed, flying, and doing its bat thing. And there's something very interesting about bats is that they have this particular protein, particular gene called Preston. And when they looked at this gene Preston, which creates the ability for the bat to have this echolocation, they also looked at other creatures that have echolocation capability, which is whales and dolphins and things like that. And they found that in whales and dolphins and so forth, they also have this exact gene, Preston. Now, how in the world can you get such exact genes through a random process? And if you believe that whales and bats had a common ancestor, that would be one way of assuming that. But that is totally outside of all the phylogenetic charts in science. Another problem in genetic studies is that the issue of orphan genes. You can find, like I said, cytochrome C, you can find a lot of similarities in other creatures, but you also find, and by the way, you can find more information out about this on the Science Freedom website. There's some more information on it, but you can also find what are called orphan genes, or genes that are so unique that there is no believed linkage between other genes. Now, it's relatively reasonable to consider that one gene might have a mutation, and after a period of time, that mutation might be useful, and the natural selection and mutation natural selection idea. But it turns out that some of these genes, just like the fossils, they just appear abruptly, and about 10 in each species. 10 to 20% of the genes, and this is in the peer-reviewed literature, 10 to 20% of the genes are orphan genes. There's just no analogy for an ancestor to these. Now that's very interesting. It brings up some interesting questions, but it's particularly interesting when you look at the work of Douglas Axe. Now Douglas Axe studied the viability of proteins, and not just any string of DNA, which codes, is how proteins come about. They're encoded from the DNA sequence. Not just any string of DNA will actually give a viable protein. It's like words. You have to have certain sequences to make the symbols make sense. And he looked at this sequence ability, and through experimentation, not through imagination or anything, but through many years of experimentation in the lab, it was discovered, and this is printed in the peer-reviewed literature, that there's only one viable sequence in every 10 to the 77th inviable sequences. So if you just do random sequences, it would be one viable sequences out of 10 to the 77th. Now that's a huge number, and it's hard to wrap your mind about how big that is. But to give you an idea of the scale of this, the entire universe, the number of atoms in the entire universe are believed to be about 10 to the 80th. And so to get a viable protein, and I'm not saying a protein that does a job within the cell, but just one that holds together as a protein, is only 1 times 10 to the 77th. And to have something that actually does work in a function is even more rare than that. So connect that with this issue with orphan genes, and you have some real problems of how mutations and natural selection can come up with a creature, or even a new feature or function in life. And so yes, that's another issue on Biology 4.1.
Okay, I am going to say that if you do have further comments, that at most one more comment, 3 minutes, and then also please do remember that all of your, you can obviously go online and submit comments as well, and also again, if general feedback is great, but also if you, like, I really appreciated your saying this is referencing the Biology 4.1 standard that you mentioned, Vince. I think Pam, were you just saying? Okay, thank you so much.
I got so wrapped up in what everybody was saying, I forgot that Sharon Anderson had something else. She says, if there's time, please submit this, and she has many references to the standards. Last week it was reported that a massive coalition of environmental organizations, activists, and think tank leaders signed a letter to President Donald Trump supporting the proposed Presidential Commission on Climate Security. This commission will re-examine government climate science. It also backs an independent scientific review of the increasingly dubious claims made in federal climate reports. Analysts say this battle will be crucial in establishing the credibility of government climate science, or the lack thereof. The signatories wrote, among the major issues that have been raised, and we hope the Commission will scrutinize the models used to have assumed climate sensitivities to CO2 concentrations significantly higher, etc., etc., etc. The Commission brings to mind the Global Warming Petition Project of 2007, which was signed by more than 31,000 American scientists, including 9,000 plus with PhDs, and stated, there is no convincing scientific evidence that human release of carbon dioxide, methane, or other greenhouse gases is causing or will, in the foreseeable future, cause catastrophic heating of the Earth's atmosphere and disruption of the Earth's climate. Moreover, there is substantial scientific evidence that increases in atmospheric carbon dioxide produce many beneficial effects upon the natural, plant, and animal environments of the Earth. References to climate change, greenhouse gases, use of fossil fuels, etc. are found in many parts of the currently proposed science curriculum. In short, contrary to many claims, the science is not settled, and there is not a scientific consensus regarding climate change and related issues. Utah students deserve to be taught the truth about global warming and climate change. This, therefore, is not the time to approve and implement those parts of the science standards that address climate change issues. Reference to these following standards. Standard 3.2.5 addresses survival of organisms. Standard 5.3.3 suggests that human activities relating to agriculture, industry, and energy may be a threat to protecting Earth's resources and environments. Standard Biology 1.3 addresses carbon dioxide and fossil fuel combustion. Standard Biology 1.5 is about reducing the impact caused by human activities. Standard Biology 4.6 is about changes in climate. Standard Chemistry 4.5 refers to alternative energy sources such as wind, solar, or geothermal power, which are usually promoted as a means of reducing carbon emissions, climate change, and global warming. Standard ESS 2.5, climate changes through natural and human activity. Current changes in climate can be compared to global climate records to help to understand how to maintain Earth's energy balance and life on Earth. The fact is that scientists do not agree on the validity or data collected, nor on the interpretation of that data. Standard ESS 3.2 addresses the heating of Earth's atmosphere. ESS 3.3, develop and use a model to describe how changes in the Earth's energy budget affect Earth's climate. Include comparisons of the rate of change in the past with the rate of changes today. Standard ESS 3.4 is about the cycling of carbon and movement of carbon, ocean and greenhouse effect. Standard ESS 3.6, releasing methane leading to more warmer global temperatures. Standard ESS 4.2, renewable resources, solar, wind, geothermal, hydroelectric, and biomass. Standard ESS 4.3, renewable solar, wind, geothermal, hydroelectric, and biomass energy resources. Standard Physics 2.4, define a problem. Examples could include feasibility studies to examine possible use of renewable energy resources to perform functions currently performed by non-renewable fuels. Thank you. And if you'd like, you can have this paper. I went through them pretty fast.
I was actually thinking, I was like, it would be great if you reference standards, and you're like, here you go. Thanks. We do want to thank you very much again for coming this evening and spending your time with us and sharing information. I will say that at this time we will conclude the public review, and if anyone would like to stay behind and chat for a bit longer, that's great, but it sounds like everyone has had a chance to share, and we appreciate that very much. Thank you so much for being here.